Welcome back. We're moving on in our CSS series. In this video, I'm supposed to take us straight into working with colors. But before then, let us quickly treat setting margins and paddings. The fact is, as you work with CSS, you'll undoubtedly work a lot with margins and paddings. So, yes, you have to understand this before we go into colors. In this lecture, I want you to take a closer look at these properties. Padding is that clear or transparent space that sits between the edge of an element and its border, and you can specify padding in several ways. First, you can define padding individually for each side of the element, moving from clockwise from top, right, bottom, and left. Now, take note of this. Setting padding in only one direction is not the same as setting padding to 0 in the others. Let me give an instance. If I set the padding top to 40 pixels, that doesn't necessarily mean that the right, bottom, and left paddings are set to 0. Remember, there may be some default browser styles at play. As an alternative to specifying the padding for each side individually, you can also use a shorthand notation, and there are 4 variations on this. First off, we can define our 4 separate values separated by white space. Now, these values are going to apply in the order of top, right, bottom, and left, respectively. Are we together? Next, you can use 3 values. In this case, the first value will be applied to the top, the second value for the left and right sides, and last value will be applied to the bottom. Now next, if your top and bottom padding are the same values and your right and left are the same values, you can use a shorthand notation with just 2 values. In this case, the first value applies to the top and bottom, while the second value will apply to the left and right sides. Finally, if all sides share the same value, then you can note that via shorthand by just setting a single value for the padding that's used for all sides equally. The rules for padding are actually pretty straightforward, and you're using a browser reset, then most elements start with no padding at all. You good on that? Okay. Now, let's move into margins. Please, be attentive. Margins are applied outside of an element's border and represent the space between elements. And while it's not factored into the total width of an element, it does affect the amount of space that an element takes up on the page. It's a very important part of achieving proper spacing between elements. Many elements have default margin applied by user agents that you might need to account for when structuring your layouts. And for sure, if you've used a CSS reset or similar to default your margins to 0, then you don't have to worry about it. But margins use the same syntax as padding, so you can either specify margins for each side individually or use shorthand notation that works just the same as padding. For the most part, margins are pretty straightforward as well, but there is one aspect of margins that actually tends to trip up even the most experienced developers. Hope you're following? Unlike horizontal margins, vertical margins are sometimes combined, or let me say collapsed, into a single margin whose size is the largest of the individual margins. That means if you have 2 elements stacked on top ozone another, only one of the element's top and bottom margins are applied. Whenever you're working with CSS, if something doesn't behave as expected, either you have incorrectly targeted an element, or there's a nuanced rule that you might not be aware of. As you begin working with margins and paddings, you'll get the hang of it. And trust me, there are always developer docs you can search when it comes to nuanced behaviors. I hope we good on this. If you have any question or questions, please channel them to the comments section. Thanks for watching. Do not forget to subscribe to our platform and stay tuned.